So the next step is to implement a button, and to implement a button, as you can see here on the right hand side, I want to implement a button just here somewhere in the space that allows me directly to delete that specific record out of the set. And to do so, I have first to implement the button. Therefore, I step here into my HTML where all the layout is defined. As you easily can see, 2 lines left here, and of course a small arrow there. That is a name and needs to be defined there. If I save that, you see nothing real happens, but at the end it is now much better. And what I like to do this is to define the button on the right hand side here, which means that I need another column. And you see my column is defined there and it ends there. So I need here another column. So there is my column. And in that column, I need, of course, a button. And button can as well have classes. If you are not sure how to define buttons, then you can directly start to bootstrap and figure out how buttons look like. You see buttons just here. For example, I will use the red button because I like just to delete something. So the easier way than just typing is just to copy it directly from the source and replace then everything here. Now I have only to ensure this becomes a delete. So, and once that button is implemented and it's part of the next column, then you can store it and you will automatically see here in our application a button. Not right nice, it is just in the same level than our line here. To ensure that this is not the case, I will just cut that line out of that column and will put it in front of the column. And with that, the whole thing looks a little bit better. Here we are. Right now, as you can easily see, nothing happens here, which means the button itself doesn't have any functionality right now. And to get functionality implemented, what I will do is I will extend the button in a way that there is functionality. And to do so, I have to add here an event. And the event for buttons where I do something with is click. And then I have to enter a function, and that function will then delete later on a record. So I call the function delete identity. And the identity I want to delete is the current record. The current record, as you can see here, is called identity. So I will just enter the identity in there. This is my function that will happen. And it is red lined here, and the red hint here says this did not exist nowhere. So what I will do is I will directly take my function I just defined and I will open appcomponent.ts. Here we are. And in the appcomponent.ts, I will add another function. So, and to get the whole thing a little bit better defined, first of all, this is the function name. That is nice. Additionally to the function name, I need here, let me say it that way, first a variable. And the variable itself, will then contain the identity object. So I name the variable, for example, my identity. I tell the system this is of type identity. And the function itself is of type void, which means the function is doing something, but it will not return any value. And then the last thing I need to define here is the code. If I save that, you will easily see I can this red lines disappear here because now the button does have functionality. In reality, it's doing nothing because my function here is already empty. But that is what I have to do now. I have at the end now to define the functionality of that specific function. And to do so, we have to know a little bit more about Angular, of course. And that is the following. First of all, what we like to do is we like to redefine our identities. So what I do here is I say, I will use this identities, which is my mock data set, as you just remember it. And that gets new defined. So I'm using here, of course, an equal. And I will do the same. I will take the same set here. This is this identities. And these identities can be filtered. And filtered means that I can filter the identities in a way that I take all records and just remove the current record. And to do so, I just say, these are my identities, and these identities are, or should be, all identities which are part of the story without the one I was just inserting. And this is my identity from the top, you remember. And having that set, you see now the function itself takes my set of identities, here it is, puts a filter on this. The filter is defined as take all beside the one I was entering here on top. And with that, if I press save, I can directly step to my list and just delete something which not works. And if that not works, then maybe I have just forgotten to save something. So I save as well my HTML. And now, as you can easily see, all of these deleted items disappears, and this is part of my mock data being, if I press F5, I get the whole list back because I restart my application. As you easily can see, this was easy to implement. Just here a specific button to delete one of these records. In the meantime, we have a lot of code there, and sometimes it's nice to get that code nicely formatted, and to do so, in Visual Studio Code exists pretty well defined functions. For example, I can press Ctrl, Shift and P and get here my standard menu open, and then is the Format Document option, as well reachable with Shift, Alt and F, as you can see it. And if I do so, then automatically this file gets reformatted. Yeah, it's a little bit different than before, but helpful. And I can as well do the same, of course, for my HTML to ensure that even my HTML it's nicely formatted. And this is sometimes helpful from time to time to ensure that all things which are implemented looks a bit nicer and better readable than before. I press save again. All it's now saved, all it's fine, and I can of course use my Git to enter the new functionality. Don't forget to stage all, and then I will just enter. And with that, I have my next commit, and my next step will be to add a form that allows me to add identities to my specific list. So in this step, we now like to just implement a form. That form should be just above that set of identities. To do so, we start here in the app component HTML. We do have here the title. We have a card body, of course, that is a card itself. But what we like to do is we like to add another card. And to do so, what I do here is I just copy the line with that card and put it in front of this specific card here. I have to ensure that at the end of the card then there is another div, of course, another closed div. And there is here a card title in the body. So what I need here are these two entries just for my form. So I add my form there. So I need another closing div just to ensure that my structure is correct. Here we are. So the new title is of course not set of identities. This is now insert identity, for example. Here we are. And now I need to implement that. Just let's have a look. That it is perfect. Insert and set of identities. Now I will just insert the identity right here. And to do that, I have to deal with forms. And to deal with forms, the first important part is to insert forms into, I like to say, my project. Therefore, I have to step to the app modules.ts. And as part of the app modules.ts, it is important just to add or to import something which is called forms or the forms module. So, and there it is, forms module. And the forms module, of course, is of type Angular Forms. This is important if I want to deal with forms, and I need to load that specific module. So beside the browser module, I load now as well the forms module. Here we are. And with that, I do have the forms module implemented. and can now use that specific forms module. Therefore, I step back to my HTML and I start to add here my specific form. I will do the same than before. I will start with a div, and the div itself will have the class grid. You remember, grid is always helpful if I want to lay out stuff. And in this specific grid, I will just put another div of class row, which is always the begin. And in the row, as we all know, always exists then a column. So, and in that column, I need then to enter my form and form field, and that is an input. And of course, I can give them format. So if I look into Bootstrap, then I will easily figure out this is a form control. And secondly, I need for that specific input field a data type, which is for the first name, for example, type text. And I need as well an ID so that I can use these form fields later on. This is then my form first name. And yeah, more or less that's it for now. I can close that tag, of course. And I need now to display that. Therefore, I press Ctrl S. And of course, I get here an error. The error tells me that I'm not good with my different divs I already created. So let's see if just deleting one will help. And here we are. We see our first form field. There it is. And I can insert there something directly underneath of the header. What could be nice as well is if I directly put there a label into it. There are many ways to enter a label. For example, I can put a placeholder in there and say that is my first name. If I do something like that, then you see in the field itself, you will find here the first name, what you can enter. This is a type of placeholder. Another way I personally like to use, because it is from a form perspective a little bit nicer as well, is not to use placeholders, just to use labels. So I will define as well a label. The label, it's another tag. It does have classes, of course. In Bootstrap, they are named form label. Not really wondering us. You can find that at Bootstrap as well. And for a label, we have always let HTML know which is the form field, which is related to that specific label. So I use here the name of my form, which is my form first name. And it looks like that was not really a good idea. Yeah, yes, of course. That is because here is just an equal missing. So here we are. And with that, if I save that, you see then, nothing. Reason is there is no label. Yeah, I have to enter the label, of course. So first name and maybe a colon. And now you see as well a label. So both it's possible. Yeah, you can use the placeholders. That's one thing. You can use the labels. I will use the labels. And to make that row complete, I need now to another column, of course. So I will just enter another column. Here we are. And that will then be my last name. So I have just to put all of these values in there. So that is the last name. And at the end, it is last name. And here we are. This is my first row of form fields. And of course, now I have to implement all the others. Cost center, department, personal number, account name, and such. And all of that need to be implemented. This is something I will do just offline here and show you the result in a second. So, and having all of this implemented, you can easily see there is now the complete form available. There is as well a submit button available. It's the same like the delete button I was just creating. There's no functionality behind the submit button yet. That is something we will directly have a look at. But what we can see here is at the end all the rest of the structure. I will now directly show you two more things. First of all of these text fields, as you can see, are fields. That is the input, of course. And the type of this input here is text, of course. There is one that looks a little bit different. That's a personal number. The type of that is number. That's the reason for. And if we click into that specific form here for a date time value, then you see that we are able to enter a date into such a very specific field. This is because we assign a type date to that start date and end date. Nothing other else yet. No functionality behind the complete form. It is just the capability to enter data. Then you can click submit and nothing will happen. Two things to do. First of all, we have to bind that form to some data. This data structure needs to be created first. Secondly, we have to implement some functionality behind the submit. This is what we will do next. Before we do that, like always, I step into my very specific Git repository. You saw we added a form and a form layout. So I enter, I completely take all my changes and enter as message layout. With that, my next step is, of course, just to create the functionality. So now let's use that step just to bind the complete form to a specific data object. And before I can do that, the first thing I need is, of course, a data object. And to get the data object, I need, of course, our application component TS, because this is where I define all the objects I need. Here's our sample data. Here, as you easily can see, there is our delete functionality we created. And now we just create a specific object for our new identities. And I call them CM for create and modify identity, because I want to create and modify just one identity. It is, of course, of type identity. And it is at the end a data object. And so I need to define all the properties. To assign these properties, I need as well an equal. Here we are. And my properties are first name. As we know, it is of type string, and the initial value, of course, will be an empty value. Then we have last name with an empty value, and additionally the account name, empty as well. For the personal number, we need something specific. It is a number. I start with 0 right here, and we will implement something other else in a second. Then we have cost center as a string with an empty value, initialized, and department. And last but not least, we have start date, which is a date. And so I need just a date, and it needs to be a new date. So, and with that, I does have my object completely defined. We don't need the end date because, remember, it is sometimes set, sometimes not. So, once that is defined, I can format the document so that it looks like a little bit better. Here we are. Control P plus format the document. And yeah, now the object exists. One thing left, and that is what we will do with this personal number. And of course, it's a little bit complicated because I don't want to build these personal numbers by hand, so I want to make it automatically. And for my very short example, it always should be the next personal number. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 7. 8 will be the next. And how to get that? No, quite easy. We want to have the maximum of all of these personal numbers plus 1. This is then the next personal number. And to get that, I need, and that's a little bit more complex, the maximum of the column personal numbers of the complete array. And of course, we can just step into the internet and figure out TypeScript and then a maximum of values of a specific property in an array, in an object array. And at the end, you will then get some solutions. I will now use the solution, for example, to use the functionality math here and the maximum. Now I have to describe which maximum, of course, I need. And therefore, I just say the maximum will be the maximum of this identities. This is my array. And there I will then map the object in a way of that I will take the personal number of the object. So, and that is at the end the maximum. Plus 1 is then the next personal number. And of course the object here, it's the object. So that should be good. A little bit mistyping here. So again, mathmax this identity map, and then the object mapped on the object personal number, and here plus 1, the whole thing is then the next maximum. And with that, this is implemented as well. Left is now, after storing it, just to bind this new identity here, this new create and modify identity here to my form. Therefore, I have to step to my app component HTML. And in the app component HTML, there is my form definition. Here we are. And as you easily can see, all of these form controls are not bound to something else. And so I'm now able to do that. And to do that is to use a two-way binding. A two-way binding goes into two directions. One direction is form to the object, and the other direction is object to the form. And such two-way bindings get typically defined by starting with a square bracket and with a round bracket as well. And then I will say ng model. And I close that in the same way again. That's it. And then I can just enter directly behind that specific thing here our object, which is of course my CM identity. And I will then bind here the first name. And this at the end is then the data binding. Now I have exactly to do the same for all the other fields. Not too hard. The input, here we are. This is my last name. And I will do the same for the rest. So, and once all of these references here are written, that means all of my data bindings to each of these form fields exist. I can press Ctrl S, and I get some error messages, which are typical, and I have to solve them. And as you easily can see, we are talking about the last name. So I go to the last name. Here is the red line. Wonderful. Yep, and it is type and case. It is case sensitive, and I have just to write it with the right letter here. It's a small l, and with that, all looks good. What you can see now after we stored it, there is personal number 8. That is exactly the new personal number we created. And what you can see here as well, if I click into that field, the actual date it's set. This is the actual date of today. And yeah, that is exactly what we like to do. If I just click on it, automatically it will be set. So I can as well let that thing done. I can fill all the others, of course, but submit button, as we all know, did not exist right now. So my next step is to create the function that is just behind the submit button. From an HTML perspective, there is just to define the function. Therefore, I need, of course, we know that, a click. And after the click, of course, I need then to define the function name. It will be @identity. And we will add, of course, the CM identity later on. And close parentheses, of course. And with that, the red line is underneath of @identity, which is quite clear because we don't have that functionality yet. So I can step to my component and ensure that in the component we will get another function, which will then just add the identity. And there will then be a new identity. We will add of type identity, and it will be a void because we will return something. And with having this function just stored, you can see that the red lines disappeared, and I can store that as well. So next thing is, of course, to create the functionality behind the button, and that means to fill here that specific functionality. And because we don't want to make it more complicated than necessary, and the new identity, that means the create and modify identity object already exists, I will just delete it here out of the header and directly add it here into the properties list. I will take the identity array, which is this identities. And these identities then will get a new object. This is something I can do with the push command. And the push command should edit, of course, another object, which is this, because it is the one I'm talking about. This time, my new created identity. And having that set, then I can as well redefine a little bit this new identity if I like to. So this identity will then be all values from above or the specific new values, and therefore I need more or less the same I defined right there. And yeah, that's it more or less. So I will save it. I got an error message. There is something wrong. Let me see it. Yes, of course. I was just turning in here an object. I don't need that. So I step here back into the code, take this out. Here we are. And now let's try it. So this is my new identity. Number 8 is good. To make that correctly. So department. So cost center. And I can add a start date. And I can directly test as well an end date. Let's just take another year for that. And then I try submit. And if you easily can see, there is the new record and there is the begin and of course the end date. The only thing here is that, course of the display, the value, it's seen in another line. Here it is. And it works exactly like expected. So, if you have seen a little bit more complicated it was just to enter the account name. And so in my very last step of that specific video, I want to implement something like an identity manager template. That means I will just automatically create this wonderful value of account names. And before we start just to implement this, we save everything. And of course, step to our Git and just commit our specific change. In this case, it was, and yes, of course, we always forget just to stage the stuff we want to commit. And here we are. So, nearly everything done. Again, last thing to do is to ensure that here in our form, I just reload the whole thing again, that here in that specific form, we will automatically just get the account name calculated. Yeah, pretty understandable. What we will do here is we will just change app components TS. Here we are. And in the app component TS, there we need a new functionality. And let's say that functionality, it's named generate the account name. And of course, it is an identity account name. This might be of type void again. And now we just need some lines of code. And what will I do? I will take my object, which is, of course, my CM identity object. This is where the account name lives of a new generated object. And the account name, as mentioned, needs then here a specific value. And you can Google something like that, of course, again. I will just build that with the help of a string formatter in the way of that two strings gets concatenated together. Therefore, I need a specific set of single quotes. I need then the first part of the string. The first part of the string is this identity object, the first name. Remember, the way how the whole thing gets built is the first name it's taken, and then additionally to the first name we will just enter the first 3 digits of the last name. I need wavely brackets here to ensure. And so my next step is then to take here from the last name the first 3 digits. This CM identities, of course, and then last name. And I need then here a function that is already known as substring. Substring exists in many languages. And what I will do here, I will start at position 1 and take the first 3 characters of that specific thing. And with that, and of course, at the really end of everything, a semicolon, I should have a new functionality. Here it's a little bit odd that there is a problem somewhere. And like always in such cases, it is sometimes a little bit more helpful if you have a look at the different code above and below. And what you can see there is that we just close here from that specific object here the wavely brackets, but we don't do that for the complete functionality. So I have to close this functionality here, and doing so I can then easily just create that function as I like to. And you see no error messages left beside this one here. And just pressing save says that this one here is not what we need here. And so I directly delete that. And now my functionality is back. And I have now a function that allows me to create these account names. What I don't have right now is something that writes it into this specific account field. But the calculation have to be triggered somewhere. That is what is missing. And so what triggers this specific generation here, that is a change on first name or a last name. And to make that happen, what I directly will do is I will add that into my HTML. That means for my fields here, first name and last name, I need some action. So that means behind my ng model, I directly will just add a change event. So if the data there is changed, then I like to call that function. Here it is. And so let's just call that function here. And the same thing will of course happen if my last name changes. So I will directly write it here. And with that, and save, I can now enter first names. And what you will see, you will get generated that account name. And with this small lecture here ends, and we have now a cool form that allows us to add identities to our list. And we have a list of identities where we can delete the single items. And last but not least, like always, after everything is saved, we step back here to our source control. We add all the changes to the stage area, and we enter last time here a commit. So that's it for now. And the next step will be, of course, then just to implement a connect to a REST service so that we have not to deal with mock data.